Hello, all. Jace here. You guys already know we had to talk about that verbal beatdown that JD Vance put on ABC News's Martha Raddatz the other day. Everyone is showing you the clip about the Venezuelan gangs, which was an important clip, but I thought there were several other answers that were equally discussion worthy. So let's go.
But I want to start with the hurricane. During Hurricane Helene, as we heard, former President Trump suggested the federal government was not only sending FEMA aid meant for the hurricane to migrants, but going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. Do you think that is true?
Well, Martha, what the president said is that fundamentally FEMA aid is distracted by going to illegal migrants. And by the way, good morning, and thanks for having me. We've got Republican congressmen who are on the ground who represent that area saying that they have to call the White House to get food and water to FEMA. I don't frankly think there's anything malicious going on here, Martha, but I do think that we've had an incompetent response to this particular crisis, particularly in Western North Carolina, which, to be fair, was hit harder than a lot of us expected it. But fundamentally, if you've got 6 days after the hurricane, the 82nd Airborne is still trickling in, I do think that we had a fundamentally incompetent, overly bureaucratic response to the hurricane. So what you hear from folks on the ground is they feel left behind. And Martha, we have to remember, of course, I know this area well. This is the Appalachian region of our country where people have felt ignored by their government for 30 years, and it doesn't help when you have a response to the hurricane that's slow, that's halting, and then you layer on top of it, of course,
Senator Vance
has done a lot.
Senator Vance, I want to go back to
resettlement work. Go ahead.
I want to go back to what former President Trump said. He said they're going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. There is no truth to that. And on staging, Pentagon officials say that active duty troops were staged and ready to go before being called upon and were instantly out the door. So President Trump, former President Trump, is saying things that aren't true about that money being withheld from Republican areas.
Well, Martha, I think you're actually confusing staging of resources from the rapid response of the U.S. military. I mean, look, in FEMA's defense, there are things after this hurricane that FEMA simply could not do. You actually need military command and control. You need military resources deployed to the area. And I think all the president has said is, frankly, what some of Kamala Harris's surrogates have said, which is that if these areas were a little bit more democratic, maybe Kamala Harris would have focused on them more. That acknowledgement is not to attack, frankly, the good folks of FEMA. It's to suggest that Americans are feeling left behind by their government, which they are, Martha.
Okay,
if you talk to folks on the ground, I've had friends that have been in Boone, North Carolina, helping with the cleanup. It is an extraordinary sense of betrayal and being left behind. People are worried that their government doesn't care about them. I'm much more worried about the incompetence of Kamala Harris's administration that led to that more than
Senator
I am
Vance,
the fact that Donald
Senator
Trump
Vance, I'm just going to say that local officials and FEMA officials say that is just.
You all are going to spot a very common theme throughout this interview. Vance starts talking about things that are actually happening. Raddatz interrupts with, but Trump said. Now, with the hurricane in North Carolina, so far there are 95 confirmed dead. Another 92 are still missing. I pray for all those people, and I hope they're found, and I hope everyone can recover from this awful event. But the Biden-Harris administration has already admitted that they have used FEMA funds to fly illegal immigrants around the country and put them up in five-star hotels. What is Raddatz even arguing about?
Flat wrong. But we played some other comments about migrants, including in Aurora, in Colorado, where Trump said the city had been invaded and conquered by Venezuelan gangs. The Republican mayor of the city said flatly the city and state have not been taken over or invaded or occupied by migrant gangs. So do you support Donald Trump making those claims that the Republican mayor says were grossly exaggerated and have hurt the city's identity and sense of safety? I understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly
that
exaggerated.
Means that there's got to be some. that means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
Don't believe your lying eyes, guys. There's nothing to see here. Don't listen to Trump's account of what people told him was happening while he was in Aurora. Martha Raddatz is going to interrupt a sitting United States Senator and current VP candidate to tell you what you actually need to know. She believes Trump's hyperbole is far more noteworthy than the citizens of Aurora being terrorized in their homes by a Venezuelan gang that was welcomed into our country by the current administration. I doubt she'd be so worried about rhetoric if they invaded her $2.1 million mansion. Now, I don't believe this Venezuelan gang is poised to take over the city of Aurora. I highly doubt it doesn't sound like they're actually taking over apartment complexes. I don't care. There are illegal immigrants who have been welcomed into our country that are terrorizing our citizens. It doesn't matter if it's a town, an apartment complex, an apartment unit. It's unacceptable.
City. Let's move on to women and abortion. Donald Trump is leading Kamala Harris in our poll among males by 8 points, but lagging behind Harris by 9 points among females. You said during the debate that you and Trump have more to do to earn back people's trust, specifically as it relates to women and reproductive rights. 56% of those polled support restoring abortion access to what it was under Roe v. Wade. So what would you say specifically to the women watching this morning who believe they should have their own say over their bodies and not the government, either state or federal?
But to answer your question, Martha, what I would say to women is that Donald Trump and I want to make it easier to make the choice of life in the first place. And I know a lot of young women, especially when I was younger, who chose abortion because they feel like they didn't have any options. And what I want to do as a person who admittedly, Martha, wants to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, I'd like to make it easier for women to choose life to begin with. I think that goes to lowering the cost of housing, which, of course, has skyrocketed under Kamala Harris's administration. I think it's making it easier for working moms to balance work and life and family. There's a lot that we can do to become more pro-family. That's how I think we can best earn back trust.
First off, that's the stupidest argument I've ever heard. Neither candidate is claiming they're going to remove state and federal say in abortion. Kamala claims she's going to get Roe v. Wade reinstated, which just means it's federal say instead of state say. Her entire question is misinformation. There was a bunch in there that I cut out about at what stage of development each campaign would accept the murder of children. But I really wish Vance and Trump would focus on the answer I included. Why aren't we endorsing life instead of when it's okay to kill.
Interview after interview, question after question, and in the debate, you refused to say that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. So I'm just going to assume that if I ask you 50 times whether he lost the election, you would not acknowledge that he did. Is that correct?
Martha, you asked this question. I've been asked this question 10 times in the past couple of weeks. Of course, Donald Trump and I believe there were problems in 2020. You haven't asked about inflation.
No, I'm sorry. Let's stick to this. I know.
The American people want us to talk about how to make their lives better. They don't want us to.
Why won't you say that?
Because, Martha, I believe that in 2020, when big tech firms were censoring American citizens, that created very serious problems. And by the way, Martha, you're a journalist. You represent the American media. Look at the polling on this. A lot of Americans feel like they were silenced in the run-up to the 2020 election. That is such a bigger issue. That fundamental problem than me and Donald Trump talking about it. And unfortunately,
but
Martha,
I don't understand why you won't just say it if you believe it.
Won't just say what? That I think the 2020 election had some problems? I've said that repeatedly.
Did Donald Trump lose? That's the question, and you know that's the question.
Martha, I've said repeatedly, I think the 2020 election had problems. You want to say rigged? You want to say he won? Use whatever vocabulary term you want. I want to focus on the fact that we had big technology firms censoring our fellow citizens in a way that violated our fundamental rights. The fact that you're so obsessed with what word I used to describe this phenomenon rather than the phenomenon itself suggests something very broken in the American media. If we want to restore trust in American elections and democracy, which I want to do, Martha, we have to talk openly about what happened in 2020. And most importantly, we've got to talk about what happened afterwards. Okay. Americans being unable to afford the basic necessities of middle-class life because Kamala Harris is in the White House.
Now, why would we talk about inflation and what's going to be done to make Americans' lives better moving forward when we can talk about the 2020 election some more? I don't know if Biden would have won or not, and neither does Trump. But no one can argue that that whole election process wasn't a dumpster fire. There were tons of issues, and nobody can honestly say it was a well-run election. My only concern is that those problems are fixed, so we don't ever have something like that happen again. The Democrats won't even address the election issues because it's giving them a talking point against Trump. It's causing all of us to doubt the integrity of the process, and that is far more dangerous to our democracy than January 11th was. Now, I got to give Vance credit. Yeah, he didn't back down, but he stayed much more diplomatic than I would have. I guess that's why he's going to make such an appealing presidential candidate in 28. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. God bless, and we'll see you for the next one.